So let me just, begin by telling you, hi, I'm Susan Sano. I am the Senior Manager for Volunteer Management Education here at Volunteer Fairfax in Fairfax, Virginia, where we had lots of ice and snow, but we're slowly recovering. I saw this morning on LinkedIn, this quote, and it's like, right. So this person who's actually a project manager wrote, if your job is only writing documents, you don't have a job. AI writes specs better now, or specs now better than you, faster than you, for free. So what's left? And then, in her explanation is like, it's our heart, it's our knowledge, it's our perspective, it's things that AI isn't going to do for you. But I just thought that was such a wonderful quote to help us get started in the conversation today. I also just want to point out some of those just gold mines of information. There's some do's and don'ts getting into this on pages 68 and 69. There's some great things in the back of the book if you made it that far. AI for Nonprofits, a resource directory, suggested reading list, and glossary of terms in the 460s and 70s in the AI for Nonprofits book. Those were my wow moments. Need to thank Dell Tech, who is our presenting sponsor for all of our webinars. They let us do these for free, so making it accessible and for everybody, and it really has made a difference. So they are a provider, global provider of software and solutions for project-based businesses. They're based here in Fairfax County, so we appreciate their generosity. And then just a reminder, this is a book club. Everybody's microphones are on mute. Please feel free to unmute yourself at any time because this is a discussion. We want your 2 cents and then some. You can ask questions when we're chatting, or you can put them in the chat area and I'll find them and I'll figure out how to pose them for everybody. We will end this webinar at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for those of you who are on the East Coast. And yes, I will send the PowerPoints to you in the next 48 hours. So don't feel like you have to write everything down or write the questions down or some of the key email addresses or something like that. But we will send them to you. Then I just need to introduce our guest co-presenter, Darian Rodriguez Heyman. I have known Darian, oh goodness, I want to say it's probably 15 years at this point. It's mostly been afar. We've never been in the same room together, but it was a good enough, I know your name, you know my name. I saw this book and I reached out to him as soon as your PR systems were churning. And it's like, want to do a book club. So with that, I want to pass it over to you. Let Darian talk a little bit about himself and his commitment to AI and strengths you're seeing in the nonprofit sector, volunteer management area, where we're still have a lot to learn. And I always love the question of, since the book was published, what's new, what's different, and what do we need to be more aware of? So I'll hand it over to you for a few minutes, Darian.
Oh, thanks, Susan. Thanks, everyone, for joining us today. Excited to be with you. I know it's pretty chilly out there, and you guys have been dealing with snowmageddon. So glad to see your smiling faces, and just hope to be helpful today. I'm Darian Rodriguez Heyman. I'm the president and CEO at Helping People Help, a social impact consultancy. I've written now 3 best-selling books on nonprofit management, fundraising, and then most recently on AI for nonprofits. Um, Let's see. Why don't we can we stop the screen share? I don't think we need to leave the bio up if
Oh,
that's
sure.
okay. But what I'll share is that I have been doing nonprofit capacity building work now for about 30 years. Got my start as executive director at Craigslist Foundation, where I started something called Nonprofit Boot Camp, and had 10,000 graduates learn about all different aspects of starting and running nonprofits, funding, volunteerism, boards, technology, you name it. And at the very beginning of that, did a big listening tour and heard a couple things. Number one, that we're already inspired. That's why we do this work. What we don't need more inspiration. What we need are tactical, practical tips and tools in order to do the work more efficiently, more effectively. And number two, that there's this whole ecosystem of incredible support resources, out there that are helpful from a standpoint of coordinating volunteer engagement or boards or fundraising, but that a lot of the startup nonprofits didn't know about those groups. And so my life's work has really come to a head as it relates to creating sort of reference manuals and user manuals for nonprofit leaders building a better world. And what are the resources out there that can be most helpful, whether it's Volunteer Fairfax or Association of Fundraising Professionals or who knows? And what are the best practices and the proven, do's and don'ts and how to get this work done? Whether, and in the case of technology like AI, how do we use it as a tool to advance our goals? Of raising more money, of serving more people more efficiently, and program measurement and evaluation, of marketing and community engagement, and of back office operations. And Susan mentioned some of the parallels to social media. I previously started the first global conference series focused on social media for social good, and I have seen a lot of similar parallels where, social media really got ghettoized in the beginning, where it was like, one small part of one person's job, even though a lot of what I did was help train up nonprofits to adopt it strategically and organizationally throughout the organization and really create a culture of innovation. We are absolutely seeing the same thing around AI. It is, 80+% of nonprofits have at least one or two people who are sort of fluent or proficient at least in AI, but under 10% of nonprofits have even created a simple one or two page policy and thought about AI at the organizational level. So we're kind of in this BYO AI moment where people are bringing their tools from home to work. There's not a policy, there's not guidelines around acceptable use or how to handle sensitive data, or what are the approved platforms for which purposes, and what are the most painful processes that we would love to automate and streamline and augment. I've been doing this work for 30 years. I've yet to meet a single nonprofit that is overfunded and overstaffed and has met all of their clients' needs. Like we're all under-resourced. And on top of that, we've got some pretty significant headwinds, economically and politically. And so the bottom line is we need to do more with less. We're leaving the age of planning and entering the age of navigation, where we need to be more nimble, more resilient. And AI is a really powerful tool. And I can talk about what's under the hood and how it works, but ultimately it boils down to when you Google something and it guesses the next word that you want to hear. That is what all of these platforms are based on. I actually studied computer engineering over 30 years ago, and back in the day, it was all about the illusion of intelligence, where you would map out every eventuality in these if-then loops of like, if Susan does this, then tell her that. And if I could map out enough eventualities, it would appear intelligent. That is not how the current technology works. How it works now is we're just going to dump a huge amount of data into these systems and let them figure out the patterns using the human brain and neural networks as context and as a paradigm. And it works for the most part, right? But because it is rooted in guessing what you want to hear, that's where you get some of the more sycophantic, like, that's a great question kind of stuff. And that's also where hallucinations come from. And hallucinations are those things where AI just makes stuff up. And I liken today's AI models to the drunk frat boy at the bar that is equally confident whatever he's saying, whether it's fabricated or true, and it doesn't know the difference. And that's kind of endemic to the technology, the way it's been developed. I think it's a solvable engineering problem, but that is at the heart of why we cannot simply just hand the robots the keys and trust them to do the work we can do. That quote that Susan brought up from that woman Audrey about like, if your job is creating documents, you have a job. I disagree completely. I'm a fundraiser first and foremost. I write a lot of documents. On average, people that use AI are 59% more productive, specifically as it relates to writing documents. So I'm not out of a job. I'm just able to write twice as many documents or write documents that are twice as effective or twice as thoughtful, right? Again, no nonprofits are like out of work to do. They're drowning in work to do. That's why we have the work-life balance issues. So how do we create more capacity, more thoughtfulness, more room to engage in human relationships, and that's what's really exciting. But ultimately, we need to think of AI as a tool that can advance our work as mission-led organizations. And we also, I think, need to be really transparent and frank about some of the challenges and the fears and the concerns that are inhibiting AI adoption, and there are good reasons for those concerns. We talked about social media as a point of reference. There's a few aspects of social media that have really negatively impacted our culture around social and emotional health, around body imaging, that kind of stuff. And unfortunately, nobody's really minding the store around AI and creating the guardrails to ensure responsible adoption, globally speaking. Maybe that's something nonprofits need to take on with foundations, because the companies themselves and the government sure as hell aren't interested. So there's a lot of really important conversations tactically and strategically that I think are important. What I would say is that, the reason I wrote the book is that nothing out there really existed like it. There had been a couple books written before ChatGPT's release by Beth Kanter, by Aflor Bruce, that were a little bit more strategic, staying human-centered, ethics, things like that. But, November of 2022, when ChatGPT 3.5 was released, within 62 days, it reached 100 million users. Compare that to cell phones that took 17 years, right? Or the internet that took 7. Like, it was by far the most vastly adopted technology in history. And it was a sea change because it just kind of works now suddenly. It's good enough to be able to be really helpful. And again, like, what was missing was a conversation about how can this be used as a tool to move forward the work of mission-led organizations and unlock efficiencies and effectiveness, while balancing the need to keep the human in the loop and this co-intelligence approach of how do we work in partnership with the robots to make us better at what only we can do. And that book hadn't been written. So we interviewed 57 experts. We sort of looked at 4 principal applications: fundraising, programs, marketing, and back office, each of which is a section with 6 or 7 chapters. And just like all the other books I wrote, it's very comprehensive and practical. Each, chapter ends with a resource review. And then there's like a whole yellow pages section with 100 different resources that you can go to if you want to dive deeper. We have also created a nonprofit under the fiscal sponsorship of INTEN, the Nonprofit Technology Network, at ai4mp.org that I just put in the chat. That basically has 2 sides of the coin. One is the website, which is a clearinghouse, a sort of resource directory for all things AI for good. Feel free to suggest stuff or to search for stuff. The other piece is the event side of things. And we had a vision, I still have a vision for training up thousands of nonprofits all around the country. We just did a sold out event with Beth Cantor in Silicon Valley, and I can't even break even on the events. I have free venues lined up in, over a dozen cities around the country. Nonprofits don't have the ability to pay more than 50, $75 right now. When you can meet them at that price point, we sell out and everybody loves the programming. But ultimately, I've had to sort of put the event side of things on ice as we identify some funders and some corporate underwriters with whom we can partner along with local hosts to fill the rooms, to be able to serve the sector at scale. And so we're kind of in more of an opportunistic model, looking at some events down in Texas and the Northeast, et cetera. But if anybody wants to talk about either public trainings or private stuff, I do a lot of that work, working with nonprofits, government agencies, and foundations to help support responsible AI integration. Um, and I think that's probably good enough to like kickstart the conversation. I've got content for days. I've got plenty of decks and all that kind of stuff. But in talking with Susan, really the goal for today was much more of a conversation, and especially because we have a fairly, intimate group. I'd love to hear from each of you and just give each of you sort of a rub at the magic genie lamp, and what are you wondering about, or what questions do you have about how to apply this technology to your work? Where are you getting stuck? And how can I be most helpful? So,
Already inspiring. And it's like, wow. Okay. So I have a bunch of questions at least to guide the information. If you have
sure.
questions, feel free to throw them in the chat area. And so, I mean, I just want to have everybody sort of get in the mood to think about what are we doing now that can be solved with AI? Is there the easy peasy part, or is there something you just say it's never going to work? And I'm going to throw in the volunteer management cycle just as a reminder if anything jumps out at you.
Yeah. I mean, so there's actually an entire chapter dedicated to AI-powered volunteer management, recruitment, et cetera, in the book, and I feel like it's a really important topic. And Gang, also runs an organization that does that kind of capacity building work in general. What I would say is that there is a role in pretty much every piece, every arrow, every part of this cycle for AI. And, the limits are you're not outsourcing your work and you're not outsourcing your relationships to AI. That's the piece that has to stay human centered and that you can do more efficiently and more effectively utilizing technology. So, back to the comment about like creating documents, that is like the lowest hanging fruit for AI, right? It's like, I need Darian's bio is too long. We need it to be a paragraph, press a button and go. Really easy. Or I need a, volunteer manual. Give me a starting point. Great. So the idea of content creation is sort of the killer app and usually the starting point for most users of AI, including nonprofit leaders. So that is low-hanging fruit, but AI is also a really effective thought partner for brainstorming. You don't, you can think of it, Beth Cantor likes to talk about AI as a chef. You can think of it as a sous chef, as like a prep cook rather, where it's like, hey, here are some onions. I need you to julienne these. Go. And you're like an AI sandwich. You're giving it direction, it's giving you the results, and then you're taking it over the finish line and double checking its work. That's really good in the content creation space. But you also can look at it as a thought partner, right? Hey, here's our employee or here's our volunteer manual currently. What are we missing? Or hey, we're, seeing a surge in the number of Spanish speaking residents in our community. If we want to engage Spanish speakers as volunteers, what are some potential effective strategies for doing that? Right? Give me a bullet point list of 10 different ideas. Oh, tell me more about ideas 3 and 7. Really, really helpful to iterate and sort of dialogue with the robots and ask them for input on stuff, ask them for suggestions. So, from a planning standpoint, you can ask it for a plan, you can ask it for a framework, you can ask it to respond to your plan and offer suggestions there. Recruitment and selection, there's also a chapter on board recruitment and board development that's AI powered, where there's some heavy overlaps here. But what are the venues that we should be looking at to recruit volunteers? Take a look at our volunteer job description or draft one for us and give me a bullet point list of suggestions that we might want to include. Instead of, rewrite this for me, how about you just give me a bullet point list of things you think I may want to change, and I can manually look at those and decide which ones to integrate. Much better way to use AI than just, here you go, robots, good luck with that task. But human led and human powered and AI supported. So recruitment and selection, huge roles there. Orientation and training, I talked about, creating and updating materials. What are we missing? What other materials might be helpful? I think because nonprofits run so lean with boards and with volunteers, all too often we don't create the infrastructure, the job descriptions, the board member agreements, and having that clarity around roles and responsibilities and what success looks like, mission critical. Supervision, doing volunteer check-ins and sort of self-assessments and creating frameworks for that, looking for trends across all of your volunteers. So it's not just at the individual level, but here are the self-assessments from 100 volunteers. What are we getting right? What are we getting wrong? What are the big takeaways and trends? That kind of data analysis is really the third superpower of today's AI models. You've got the content creation, you've got the brainstorming and soundboarding, and you've got the data analysis where it can look at 100 different surveys and tell you what the trends are. Really, really powerful. What are we missing? Right? That kind of stuff. Recognition again, thought partner. Here's what we're currently doing to recognize volunteers. Any other suggestions? Give me a bullet point list of 20 ideas. Oh, I like those 7 ideas. Give me 10 more like that, and give me a little one paragraph about each one that I like, and let's bat that around at the next board meeting, right? Evaluation, we talked about the assessments and frameworks for that. So, as you can see, well, let me put it this way. When we talk about Chat GPT, GPT technically stands for a generative pre-trained transformer. That means, like I said, we're dumping a ton of data and letting it figure out the patterns, and it is generating answers to our questions. But it is the transformer piece is guessing that next word you want to hear, right? That's what it actually means. Personally, I think it's easier and more helpful to think of GPT as general purpose technology. This is like electricity or the internet. You can use it for anything. So the question is not, does AI have a role to play in each and every aspect of volunteer recruitment and engagement and management and every other aspect of nonprofit management? The answer is, a resoundingly yes. The more accurate question is, what does it look like for us to responsibly deploy this tool to assist with the planning component of our volunteer management efforts, of the recruitment and selection component, right? And it's a real thoughtful exercise that you can invite the robots to be part of that table and ask them. You don't need to know the answers. How can you help me solve this problem? Right? One of the things to think about with AI is the importance of building the bridge backwards. You don't need to know how to get to where you're going. You could say, I want to write the next great American novel, or I want to have a world-class volunteer management program, where everybody is super inspired and recognized and contributes meaningfully to our mission. What do you need to know? How can you help me get there? And the robots will tell you and be your partner in achieving those goals. So, just a couple thoughts and reflections there. Um, there was just a question that came through about how to get started and what tools are best. The reality is the primary tools, the large language models that you've heard of, starting with ChatGPT, but Google has Gemini, Anthropic has Claude, Microsoft has Copilot, DeepSeek came out of China recently. There's Perplexity. These are all different models. They all pretty much work the same way. Some are better than others at different things, and that is in flux. So I'd rather not point you to one specific model. I will say that ChatGPT is the most popular at this point, and Anthropic's Claude is doing a lot with nonprofits. They offer sort of out of the box discounted pricing, some training for nonprofits, and they just recently released a HIPAA compliant version, and Claude Code, which is kind of the vibe coding thing you've heard about, where everyone is a programmer now, and you don't have to know how to code, you just have to know what you want to build. And as tastemakers, as people that have the feel of the pulse of our communities, we're in a really good position to understand, what are the needs and what solutions are needed. And now you don't need to know how to build those or have the budget for it. You just need to know what's needed, and the tools can help you get there. So those generative AI large language models are sort of usually the front door to AI. There are some writing tools like Grammarly that are very popular. And personally, the image and video and audio creation tools are like blowing my mind right now in terms of how far they've come just in the last 3 months or so. So if you've played with Notebook LM to create audio files, that could look like, and I can play some samples for you if you want even, but one of the 57 experts in the book fed our 600-page transcript to the robots and instantly for free created a 5-minute podcast version that's like NPR level quality, like instantly, of the entire book synthesized into 5 minutes. And I've been using that with grant proposals. If I'm trying to get through to a donor, or I know the CEO at the foundation and I know they're never going to read our 10-page grant application, now, along with the grant, I'm also submitting a 5-minute audio overview that someone can listen to on their way into work. Wow, now I'm starting to talk to the CEOs or the busy donors who I don't have as much access to. Nano Banana is a new imagery tool where you can take an article or a blog or what have you and press a button and create a visual overview of it, that is not going to be rife with typos like they were 3 months ago. Like it has hit a tipping point, and Nano Banana is nuts. And Gamma is the third one that's really good at taking an article or a document and turning it into some kind of visual. So those are some tools, and I'm again happy to share some samples of that if helpful. And let's see, we had a couple other questions come through. Um, let's see. Bill's talking about how most nonprofits aren't resourced enough to take this on. Um, you know, um, Yeah, so I think nonprofits are chronically under-resourced on all fronts, right? It is sort of by design of how the sector has really been created since its inception, where we're trying to provide a safety net that we're not being given nearly enough resources for, and trying to rely off of really scant resources to do that. So it is not surprising to me. I mean, I've done a lot of work in the foundation community, a lot of philanthropic advising. There are a small set of funders that are thinking about how they can integrate AI internally to support their own operations. I'm working with some of those funders now. There are an even smaller number that are thinking about AI for their grantees. I'm talking with some funders about launching cohort programs or trainings or what have you, executive coaching hours. And then there is like a teeny tiny little microcosm of the philanthropic community that are thinking about like sector-wide capacity building. So it is really early days. And quite frankly, Bill, I would say that's no excuse. Like that is, in fact, if anything, it's a testament to why we need all the advantages we can get, and we need to be able to leverage all of the resources at our disposal, not just financial, but technical, to better and more efficiently and more effectively serve our missions and our communities. I think it's only going to get harder. I think this age of navigation instead of planning is really upon us. And so it's incumbent upon us to figure out how we can use this stuff. And Miran just brought up the question about data security, which is a really great question. It is at the top of every list of concerns, rightfully so. If you are working with, HIPAA records and in the healthcare space, if you're working with youth, or just in general, if you have any donors or personally identifiable information, you have, private data that you don't want to get out there. And the thing to keep in mind, Moran, and everyone really, is that the currency of today's AI economy is data, right? I talked to you earlier about the fundamental way that this stuff works, where we're just dumping a ton of data and letting it absorb the patterns based on the human brain model. And all of the predictions are that these AI companies are going to run out of data at the end of this year to hoover up and feed their next model. So they are looking everywhere they can find for data, whether that's YouTube or publishers or, anytime you enter a prompt in a chat GPT, that is helping to train the next model. That is a source of data, right? So there are ways, so it is inherently insecure. And if you just use the free version of any of these platforms out of the box, you are feeding the next models and that data is being shared. So you don't want to do that. You can, at the very least, just go into settings and say, I don't want to train your next model. I don't want my stuff to become part of the training data. So opt out, and that will make it more secure. Theoretically, if, OpenAI gets hacked, there's still a possibility, even if you've slid that thing over, that that could be a problem and that data could be exposed. So there are groups out there that have talked about like changing every donor's name to a Disney character and, like that kind of like mass replace stuff defeats the purpose of creating these efficiencies in my mind. So the real solution to that, Moran, is to have your own private large language model, which means you can basically create like a robotic member of your team. There's a case study of a small nonprofit in the book that did this, which is the Lung Cancer Foundation of America. But there are really two platforms that I would point you to, Change Agent and Cause Writer, which I just put in the chat. These are really my two primary technical partners when I'm working with foundations and nonprofits that are looking to adopt technical infrastructure. And building this sort of like robo member of your team, your own custom large language model or GPT, has a couple benefits, right? Number one, instead of it just being, Chat GPT, and it's almost like that movie Memento where you have to remind it what you want and who you are every time you interact with it, because the so-called context window, which is a technical term for its short-term memory, is not long enough now. Like it will remember what you told it yesterday, but not last week. That's changing over time, but it's still a pain in the butt. And it kind of doesn't know who you are. It's like, you're a perfect stranger all the time. If you create your own custom large language model, you can train it on your past annual reports, your website, your grant applications, books you've written, whatever. So it knows your mission, it knows your program, it knows your voice and how you speak. And this is also going to decrease hallucinations because you are telling it this subset of the world's data is true. This is like a recognized source of truth. And that will not only train it on your voice, but it will also decrease some of those hallucinations. But the other thing, Moran, is these platforms that are sort of built to work with nonprofits at Change Agent and CauseWriter, they will also purge all the data on a regular basis. So, worst case scenario, even if they get hacked, there's no gold in Fort Knox. And they, from a values standpoint, it's environmental sustainability and the way that they do what they do, they're sort of geared for nonprofits. CauseWriter tends to be a bit more lower cost and turnkey. It can be a couple grand in a couple months to adopt something like this. Whereas Change Agent is a little bit more bespoke and more the Cadillac and a little bit more custom built and a bit pricier and takes a bit more time.
Well, let
Um,
me get to
yeah, go
another
ahead.
question just because yeah, we're 40 minutes in. We've covered one question. I just want to make sure that we're gonna give people some peace of mind here about the question is, will volunteer management be a job next year or 10 years from now, that kind of thing. And I just, really want to stress, and I'm hearing this, through and through from you, Darian, about it's about we need to transform what we do, and it's not about elimination. We still have that human touch that is so valued by our organizations and by fellow volunteers. But thinking about some of these items about the role AI can take in volunteer management, the human skills are essential. And it's talking about shifting, not eliminating.
Yeah, well said. I mean, the best metaphor I've heard is like it's if you're in a swim meet and you have swim fins on, you have a tremendous advantage. And the reality is everybody's going to have swim fins pretty soon. But by putting them on now, you get a head start, you get an advantage that not everybody is currently leveraging. And ultimately, volunteer management is the business of human relationships. So that is not something you can outsource to the robots for generations. Maybe we'll get to the Jetsons at some point, but that's not where we're at today. And being able to do the things that only we as people can do is what it's all about. And we're drowning. We don't have enough of us to go around. So it's more about helping you work more effectively. A lot of people like to say the robots aren't coming for your jobs, they're coming for the jobs of people who refuse to work with robots. Right? Like you can't be an accountant today and not use spreadsheets or calculators. It's just not possible. You can't like not use electricity unless you're Amish. Like, this is where things are heading. And there are some very valid reasons for fears and concerns that we've talked about. And so it is really this co-intelligence, this how we partner with the technology to do things better and more effectively. Um, and so hopefully some of those comments were helpful. Susan, I do think we've covered more than one question because I've responded to a couple things in the chat, and
Mhm.
specifically, there's another one in here about should everyone in the organization be learning these tools? And what I would
Yeah.
say is that just like I talked about with social media, is the idea of creating a culture of innovation, right? These tools can help everyone. So number one, I would contradict myself and say, by no means am I suggesting that everyone be forced to use these tools. Like, that is not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is these tools should be made available to everyone. People should be encouraged. They should recognize that they're not like too late and they need to catch up. The train's leaving the station. There are no experts. We're all building the plane while flying it. And this tool can be helpful to each and every one of us. And it's a little scary. We've all seen the Terminator. We're worried about some of these things. And so enabling and empowering people to, dip their toes in the water and feel comfortable experimenting in public and come out of the closet, really helpful. Encouraging at-home use. You're going on a road trip this weekend. Why don't you ask AI what to see on the way? Or here's a picture of what's in my fridge. What should I cook tonight? Getting comfortable at home allows people to feel more confident to bring it into the workplace. But also creating just an open forum once a month, have an all hands meeting with your volunteers, go around robin and say, what have you used AI for over the last month? What went well, what went poorly, what implications can you see on our mission and how we can serve more people more effectively? And just like normalize these conversations so we can demystify it and bring it out of the shadows, really helpful, and providing some basic training. That all that stuff is super helpful. Um,
I do want to
let me
stress
pause there
this.
because it seems like Susan's got another question for me.
Yeah, I do want to stress when we're thinking about volunteer AI policies for your volunteer program, do not work in a bubble and see what the larger organization is doing because they could be taking you down a different path and you want it to be the same. You want to be on the same team for setting these kinds of policies. But addressing the ethical issues, safety issues. Bill had a question about the environmental issues that AI is causing, and how should we as nonprofits think about in terms of our responsibility to the environment?
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about that, but let me talk about the organizational and the policy piece first, because I think this is critical, and this is really where the gap and the chasm in the sector is coming home, right? Because again, if you look at the interest level, the book is a bestseller, the keynote, lines out the door. Every conference you go to, half the sessions have AI in the title nowadays. And then you look at under 10% of nonprofits have an organizational strategy or policy. So, yes, having a policy is like the first step in sort of a crawl, walk, run, like, beginning to open up this conversation. And if you don't have one, people are using AI anyway, and they're going to use it in ways they shouldn't. They're going to put donor and other personally identifiable info into these prompts, and you're going to create some risk and liability. We don't want to do that. So even just having a one, two, 3 page policy to start the conversation, and then as part of one of those monthly all hands meetings, let's talk about what's in there, what's missing, what's extraneous, what do we need to change, how do we make this more in line with our values. But ultimately, the 3 things, and I would point you to in 10. Uh, Here, let me put these in the chat. But there are a couple resources that I would point you to where you can, use these to create a policy very efficiently. In 10 and Fast Forward are the two that I would point you to. But the point is, you can just get started with something and then workshop it and talk about it as a group. The 3 things I would encourage you to make sure that policy includes is which platforms are approved for which purposes. Are we all running ChatGPT, or is it, whatever you like? Or are there certain platforms we don't want anybody to use for whatever reason? Number one. Number two, sensitive data. To Moran's question, what is the sensitive data that we are handling and processing, and how should that be managed responsibly? And number three, what is our wish list? As we get comfortable with the technology, what are the most painful and clunky, repetitive, and rote functions of our organization that we would love to automate or enhance using the robots once it gets to the right point? And let's create a running and prioritized list of those things so that we can kind of reference that on an ongoing basis. Just starting there with like 2 pieces of paper, that immediately puts you at the head of the class and is a great project for a volunteer with a tech background, by the way.
Mhm.
And by the way, I should also mention board.dev and the Nonprofit Technology Congress. That is a national effort to get more tech leaders on boards. So a way to, sort of level up your volunteers. I also would point out, just because we mentioned fundraising earlier, far too many nonprofits in the country don't recognize that their volunteer management strategy and their fundraising strategy are intertwined. The data shows volunteers are 4 times as likely to donate to the nonprofits they serve than regular folks. And when they give 10x on average. So all too often, we don't think of our volunteers as part of our donor base and part of our donor community. And AI can be really helpful to think about some strategic and, powerful relationship building ways to unlock that. that's not transactional. So let's see. Sorry, Susan, you were saying there was a question from Bill about oh, the environmental damage. Okay, so what I would share here, Bill, is a couple different things. So I worked on the UN SDGs for climate. I was a commissioner for the environment. I'm working with the Goldman Environmental Prize currently to help them look at AI adoption. So I'm looking at this pretty deeply. And the punchline is it is a little bit opaque, but it's also overblown, right? What I mean by that is that most of the data that we're able to access today is coming from government sources about like what's projected, and it's coming from like the variable cost, the usage of like every prompt you put into ChatGPT or your platform of choice, and neglecting a lot of the training of the models that enable you to put that prompt into ChatGPT. No surprise if you look just at, adding in a prompt and searching for something and asking your platform of choice a question, insignificant. Like you could do 1,000 of those and compare the impact on how much water you use to make a hamburger, and it's still like a million X for the hamburger. So the actual use of each prompt is insignificant and inconsequential. And what the data is showing is that an acre of farmland uses more water than an acre of a state-of-the-art AI training facility. So, this it in general is pointing us to the point or to the insight that the water and the electrical implications of AI are generally overblown by the media and are generally a result of poor urban planning, where Amazon is building a data center in rural South Dakota and it's like 3 years in the making, but when they turn it online, all of a sudden the farmers' wells run dry. Like, that's not because they're using too much water, it's because they didn't upgrade their infrastructure and accommodate, everything that was planned for. So that's in general what it looks like. But what I would say is, I have been working now for several months to try to come up with like a super simple graph or chart that says, here is AI's impact, combining the training and the usage on water and on power usage and pricing today and what's predicted over time. I can't create that graph. I've spent hours looking at different data sources and trying to do that, and it's just not that easy right now. I just put a link in the chat to, the best article that I've seen in terms of, documented research and analysis around AI's impact on the environment, specifically on water and power. I would point your kids to that, Bill, and just that's a pretty big rabbit hole that they could spend a lot of time. It's very well cited and it's pretty thorough. But that's sort of the punchline of what it all boils down to, is it's a little bit tough to get a really true and comprehensive picture.
I just want to go back and make sure that we stress this, the advice to start small. Don't try to inhale everything and see what you can do. And I like that idea of checking back with your team periodically. It's changing so quickly. That's the part that I just really want to stress. In my fake AI policy and procedure handbook, I dated it. I think I should have dated by month as well as year, because I think it's changing that quickly. In the book, page 33, they start talking about embracing a 90-day plan. And in my research preparing for today, this is my advice. Don't forget, we always will have the human responsibilities, because legally we can't blame AI for whatever it tells us to do. We have to be the backstop, the you agree with what you're saying at all times. And if you're giving that up, you're giving up too much. So you can't blame AI on any instructions you give to volunteers, anything you tell them. You can say it just gets ourselves in trouble in the long run. So just throwing that out there.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think it's kind of like a calculator, right? Where it's like just the tool that you're using, but you have to do the right math in your spreadsheet or what have you. And you have to oversee the results and make sure they make sense. Like the technology is not at the point where we can hand the robots the keys. We need to use it in this sandwich mentality of like, tell it what you need, iterate and go back and forth and dialogue with the robots to get to what you need. And
So
oftentimes, instead of saying, write this grant for me, it's, give me this one paragraph. Let's workshop that. give me this next section, and then let's stitch it all together. So that iterative process of give me 10 ideas, let's hone in on these three, and now flesh those out, that's where the technology really shines.
Now, I've heard of a group saying we're going to elect artificial intelligence as a member of our board of directors. And I'm thinking that's crazy. But I'm just, thinking about the ethics implications, the good governance, what your bylaws say. That's it's like trying to not accept some of your responsibilities as a board member. Do you have any thoughts on that? I
Yeah, I think that's an asinine idea. I don't, again, like we're not trying to outsource leadership here. That's
yeah.
just not what is feasible or advisable. And it is also a phenomenal resource that is underutilized. So to me, it's not about voting it in as a member of a committee or as our board. It is a tool that we are using like a spreadsheet or word processing to achieve our goals. And the real question is, how can this tool, along with many others, be utilized to help fulfill our responsibilities, fiduciary and otherwise, and make us as impactful as possible as a group and as an organization?
So often when there's change within the world and the nonprofit sector is the last to, are there some costs or things that we should be budgeting for when we're starting to embrace AI so well? You've talked about the free versions. Is it worth the investment? Should we budget for some of the costs that are involved with AI? What are you thinking?
Yeah, I mean, I do think that uh what I would say is that it is helpful to have some financial resources available. You can sign up for free or discounted programs for the main LLMs like Claude. Um, Most of them have sort of a pretty easy process to get the fees waived at like $20 a month. And depending upon how much you're using AI, 20 bucks a month can go pretty far, and you can have people share the same license like you do with your Netflix password. And what you're getting if you pay for the upgraded version with most of these platforms is access to the most current model, and all the technology curves are like it's getting so much better every generation. So you're getting access to like the newer car, instead of the outdated model that carries with it a bunch of different benefits. There's usually also more data security at that level. And so, I would say it's not critical in the beginning. You can use ChatGPT or any other platform right out of the box. And, once you start to get kind of serious with it, 20 bucks a month can go a long way. If you wind up using like CauseWriter, I mentioned earlier, part of that platform is like a meta membership to all of the most current models. So you wind up paying 100 bucks a month, but then through that you can access all the different platforms and tools and see what it looks like to create this image on this tool versus that tool, all in one centralized place that is trained on your organization and your voice, and that's data secure. So, those tools will each have their own pricing. I would, before I would carve out a budget, I would know what I was looking for and what I needed and what problems it was going to solve, and then I
Yeah,
would advocate for a budget
yeah.
accordingly, whether that's on the technical development side or on the professional development and training side. One thing that I would absolutely include regardless is a budget for, buying books like this one or going to conferences or webinars. And the reality is times are really hard. And as a conference organizer, I've seen like lower the price and we sell out, but try to cover our costs and it's a non-starter. And so I recognize that it's really tight right now. Resources like TechSoup are a great,
Mhm.
platform to go through to get discounts on technology. And then I would just start with the free version of most of these tools.
So I always like to wrap up with the same couple questions, especially for those participants who are with us today. Who else at your organization should be reading this book?
Mm, I mean, for me, I think executive directors, and board chairs, people who are in a leadership position, or any, development director, or any person in a leadership role should, in general, keep the saw sharp in terms of what tools are available that can help us be more effective whether it's just in my role as heading up development or operations or the organization as a whole. I think it's mission critical for those people to understand at a strategic level what's possible. But I also think the line staff, whether it's the volunteer manager or the volunteers themselves, this stuff is helpful because they're the ones, doing the heavy lifting, and if they can do it more efficiently, more effectively, can be really helpful. So the book was sort of intentionally written for grassroots, community-led organizations and for leaders of all different levels. But I would love to see board members get more involved with, being helpful in supporting the work of the organizations that they advise.
Excellent. And just, for all of you who are participating, think about, an action item. What should you do to become a better, more effective leader of volunteers? I'll let you think about that a little bit because that calls for some decisions. I just want to take a brief moment to let you know that we have a lot coming up in the next month. We have our basic volunteer management boot camp. If you need a refresher or one of your staff members or you have interns, feel free to come to this. If you are looking to increase those managing up skills, introducing I believe, calls for some managing up and empowering yourself. So feel free to join us. Middle of February on hidden biases. On February 11th, upcoming is if you want to teach your volunteers the elevator speech, an oldie but goodie. If you are going to be sitting for your CVA exam or become CVA, Certified Volunteer Administrator, there's a really good class on ethics in volunteer management. Please feel free, whether you're taking the exam or not. And then finally, at the end of February, on February 25th, I have a brand new webinar about do volunteers who ghost you scare you the most? And thank you for joining us today. If you have valued this conversation, which I really now in retrospect say we should have probably talked for 2, 3 hours on this. We're looking for a thank you, a high five, a donation of $5, and you can do that through the QR code. And before I totally wrap it up, I'm really proud to listen or to share the next book selection, and that's The Price of Nice. And that'll be held at the end of April. A final heartfelt thank you to Darian. Oh my goodness, I'm just sort of sitting here saying this is better than I could have ever imagined. So want to thank everybody for joining us and letting us know. And we're looking for evaluation. I'm just about to put that in the chat. There you go. But Darian, really, you're just full of all the right knowledge and from the right level and from, truly the voice of experience. You are our artificial intelligence for the nonprofit sector. So thank you again. But we're here for a couple more minutes. Feel free to ask any other questions. You can unmute yourself if you want, or you can just put it in the chat. This has been a wonderful conversation. I think, let's see, 4 pages of notes that I took, and I've been reading about this stuff. So,
Yeah, so Susan, actually, if I could take over screen sharing, I think I just
oh,
want to end with like a really quick example because I could
sure.
picture turning your volunteer manual into like an audio file. So let me just quickly share like a sample of what that can look like. So, first of all, these are just some of the content creation tools that we talked about, but I want to share that audio example of like my 600-page book that somebody fed to Notebook LM for free and created this NPR quality podcast, instantly. And imagine turning your volunteer handbook into something like
Welcome to
this.
the deep dive. We cut through the noise to get you informed fast. Look, the world's moving at warp speed, right? Especially with all this buzz around AI and organizations everywhere trying to do more with less. That's just the reality. But for nonprofits, often resource strapped, but so deeply human centric, there's this big question. How do you genuinely harness AI's power without losing that invaluable human touch?
That really is the core challenge, isn't it? And it
So, I just wanted to end with that as like one little example of what comes out of the box nowadays. Like it's gotten really, really good. So I invite you to play around with these tools. I invite you to think about how can they be useful to advance our mission and enable us to better serve the community. I put my information in the chat so people have my personal mobile phone and email. I always offer up a free pro bono coaching session to anybody that joins me for a keynote or a webinar or a podcast. So feel free to reach out if anyone wants to talk about, your specific challenges or needs or what's going on in your organization. But most of all, I just want to thank you for the good work that you do every day. I want to thank you not only on behalf of our host with Susan and Volunteer Fairfax and myself, but I want to thank you on behalf of the thousands of people you collectively serve. Hope you're leaving this talk inspired to action. I hope to hear from you if I can be helpful, and have a great day, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks
Thank
so
you for the
much.
book and the time you've taken to talk about this with us.
My
Just
pleasure. Thanks for your
worth
leadership.
it's gold. Thanks again. Bye, everyone.
Take care.
Thank you, Susan.